served in Afghanistan and was an aide-de-camp to Generals Eikenberry and Crystal. Later went on to the War College, the Naval Postgraduate College, and received an MA degree or an MS degree in South Asian and Middle East security. Uniquely qualified now as a civilian, but as you'll see, he's had a unique 30 days in Washington, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to be involved in the creation of a new administration. We hope to have plenty of questions. You can be as critical as you like, because he's a nice guy. His skin is thick, he's going to be offended. So I give you Jason Howk.
So I wanted to open up this talk with these three ideas, and I want you to take these away with you when you leave school and you think about what you want to do in life. Somebody was offered the second highest job in the Defense Department, and they turned it down. And it made me really think about that idea of somebody being called a public servant. People who work in Washington, D.C. are, in the back, okay? Yeah. Are really proud to be called public servants. They're doing your work. They're doing the citizens' work in Washington, D.C. And it struck me today, are you really a public servant if you don't want to serve because a particular political party is in power? Or are you a self-servant? I'm not saying she is. I hold her up as a role model to many of the young women that I mentor. I think she's a great defense thinker, but I was surprised that she turned it down for mostly political reasons. It's something I never did in my time, as I mentioned in there. I deployed and served in the military under 4 presidents. That means 2 different political parties twice, and I worked just as hard on every mission. So I want you to walk away remembering that public service is not about serving a political party. It's about serving your country. And you have to separate those 2 things. The second point, being apolitical, it doesn't mean you can't align with a political party. It just means if you want to serve your country or serve your community, you've got to put your community first and not the party. Because our country breaks apart when we put political parties above the citizens and what we're trying to do. And the last thing is selfless service. It's an honor, it's a privilege to serve your country in any capacity, whether you're in the Peace Corps, State Department, Defense Department, intelligence community, whatever you want to do. You want to teach, be a fireman, policeman, whatever you want to do. That's an honor and a privilege, and you should do it because it's a privilege. Put the country and everything else above your own self-interest and be selfless. And if you want a good role model to look at that, look up General George C. Marshall. It's not anybody you may never have heard of. Has anybody heard of George C. Marshall? A handful? He's probably the most important person of the 1900s. Probably the most important person in the world. He rebuilt Europe. He was the Secretary of Defense. He was the Secretary of War. He ran the entire war, World War II. He ran the whole war. He was the advisor to the British and to the Americans. He was the senior that everybody looked up to. The guy served for like 50 years. He served his country. And he died not long after retiring. His 50 years service is a lot. But look up his story and think about what it means to put your country above yourself. So he mentioned I had a unique opportunity. Somebody that was very senior in the Trump campaign knew my background doing national security and foreign policy and asked me to come up to D.C. and take a look at what they were doing and help put them into office in a good place and help them make that transition. So worked on getting the National Security Council staff ready to go in and look at the foreign policies, tried to head off some foreign policies I thought we shouldn't be doing, but those arguments are for another time. I went in it in an apolitical way and gave them my best advice. They always just take what they want. So, foreign policy, national security, what does that mean? When the president is given a crisis in the world, he brings some advisors around him, and they tell him, we should do X, Y, or Z. We should do option A, B, or C. Here are the risks. Here's what we're trying to do. This is what can go wrong. This is what we hope to get out of it. These are the results we want. And then the president has to make a decision. And a lot of times that involves risking somebody's life. And that's national security and foreign policy. It's making decisions that usually cost somebody a life if you're wrong. or even if you're right, people are going to pass away. So those are the people around him right now, minus the National Security Advisor in the front. It's been changed out with General McMaster. If you haven't read General McMaster's book, go ahead and pick it up. He wrote it when he was a major, and it's a great piece of work. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is what you may see in the next 4 to 8 years, depending on how elections go. For the first 4 years especially, these are issues you're going to pop up. We're going to quickly go backwards, though, and take a look at the last 8 years' foreign policy and national security, and think about what they were faced with, what they decided to do, what the results were as we look forward. So the Obama Doctrine. When you hear the word doctrine attached to a president, it's talking about foreign policy. It's talking about national security. There was a Truman Doctrine. There was a somewhat of a Johnson Doctrine. There was a Reagan Doctrine. That's what they're talking about when you see the word doctrine attached. So his going in, he basically told his administration, I was there when they changed hands, working for a 4-star general, so I got to see a lot of these conversations. Was don't do stupid stuff. He used a different word. I put that in quotations there. You can look that up. I'm not going to say it in public. Or, as a lot of people figured out, it turned into do the opposite of what Bush did. That was kind of the other thing that administration kept in mind. So they said, hey, we need to win the good war. That's what he campaigned on. Afghanistan was the good war. Withdraw from Iraq, that was the bad war. Eventually they decided to intervene in Libya and tried an idea of leading from behind. He was faced with a red line declaration in Syria because the Syrian president used chemical weapons, international violation, and then we decided not to do anything about it. We wanted a reset with Russia during those 4 to 8 years. That was one of the ideas they wanted to work on. They wanted to take the idea of treating terrorism as something you go to war with back to a criminal activity and try to prosecute it more with police. And then there was a lot of critics would say there was the apology tour to try to make everybody like us again. That was really to do the opposite of what Bush did stuff. So those were the big things that fell inside the Obama Doctrine. So up in the top corner, Afghanistan is now the longest war in the history of the United States of America. We are still there on the ground in combat. What happened at the same time he announced he was going to reinforce the troops that were on the ground, he also announced that we were going to leave, which kind of told the enemy, you're only going to have reinforcements for 18 months. Telegraphing a punch, we like to call that. So that one didn't quite work out the way he wanted. He didn't take the full advice of the military. He gave them a lesser option, and then he told the enemy when we were leaving. The enemy used that to their advantage, not to ours. So that one didn't work out quite the way we wanted it. One huge impact, though, that they did make in Afghanistan was starting a peace process. And that is a huge thing for one reason. Peace processes take 20 to 30 years to pan out. You start one today, like Northern Ireland, we started a long time ago. The peace process in Colombia started a long time ago. It just got signed, last couple of months. So starting that peace process, getting something on paper, getting the international community to back it, huge. That was a game changer. So you'll see that one continue to be attached to his name and his work over the decades as it unfolds. Maybe in your lifetime, you'll see the end of that one. So ending the war in Iraq, 2011, pulled every bit of our troops out of Iraq against the advice of the military. Diplomats didn't fight very hard to try to keep some people in there, but he was keeping a campaign promise, so he was true to what he wanted to do. Unfortunately, by 2016, we had combat troops back on the ground in Iraq, and we're probably going to send more over right now to reinforce the Iraqi army that's pushing through Mosul because they're having some good success. So he ended a war, had to go back into the war, didn't call it a war, and that's how that one kind of panned out. The intervention in Libya is this picture on the bottom corner. That's what Libya looks like today after an intervention by NATO, and it's chaos. And when ISIS is pushed out of Iraq and Syria, you're going to see them pop up here for a while, and then we're going to have to go hunt them here for a while. So Libya's intervention didn't really work out as well. The reset with Russia is mentioned in the middle here. Russia's in red, Crimea is in red. It didn't used to be in red, it was in blue. So we didn't quite reset with Russia very well. They stole a country, and they are involved in the Ukraine right now. Every day they're bombing Ukrainian citizens. So they're kind of at war with Russia. And then in the red line in Syria, we pulled back from it. We didn't do anything for the chemical weapons. The Syrian military started to really fail, and a civil war happened. And that is how the country of Syria is kind of held together today. There's quite a few people that own a piece of land there. So that is the results of some of the main issues in the Obama Doctrine. Save the answer to the end if that was successful or not. There are things that worked out well. There are many things that didn't, and that's what happens in every administration. This is not unique in American history. Every president starts out with a list of things they'd like to get right, which is what we're going to move into now. So what's the Trump Doctrine going to be? You've heard the phrase America first. There's the idea of peace through strength. That means if you have a really strong army, nobody's going to want to go to war with you. So he wants to build up the army. We've almost reached combat and effectiveness, as the chiefs just testified last week under the last administration. So now we're going to have to rebuild not just material, but training hours. Because if you don't know how to fire a howitzer, it doesn't matter if you own a howitzer. You have to know how to get it to work. Defeating ISIS and other radical Islamic terror groups. That's one of his key items. He has asked the Secretary of Defense to give him a plan. 30 days is up. They just sent the plan back to the White House. They're reviewing it today. There's a discussion. I came here last time and talked to you about radical Islamist organizations. There's a discussion over what we're going to call them and how to change the vocabulary. That's still undergoing. We do call them ISIS now, not ISIL or Daesh or Faesh or any of the other. It's ISIS, so that's been sorted out. Rebuilding the American military, I kind of touched upon. A foreign policy that puts American interests first and involves embracing diplomacy. These are things you're probably going to see in the national security strategy. Other big things, allies matter, but I would be interested to see which ones. Not all allies are equal, so which ones are they going to work with closest? Individual liberties, freedom is probably going to be more of a watchword than democracy building. You're not going to make everybody happy, but you do need to reach out to people. I think you're going to see that concept. The President and Vice President have already started talking to a lot of people. Secretary Tillerson is on a world tour to talk to a lot of leaders. Secretary of Defense is doing the same thing. So you're going to see a lot of outreach. Doesn't mean they're all going to make, we're going to make friends with a lot of people, but the outreach will be there. Military, not the first answer, even though the budget that came out today or is being leaked out is showing pulling back on money for State Department. They're also pulling back on people for State Department so that they can get back to core diplomatic jobs and not get lost in some of the other jobs they had developed over the years. As governments get bigger, they get extra people, and that's their idea. They're going to take some out. Taking a riff off an older idea to talk loudly and carry a big stick. So instead of talking softly, we are probably right now talking more loudly. If Twitter is any indication of how we're going to communicate to the world, that's pretty loud, direct, right from the president. But the idea is still have peace through strength, have a big stick behind you if you're going to do that. Direct diplomacy by the president, we've also all seen that, and Twitter is going to play a role in that. I don't think Twitter is going to go away for this president. And economics is a security issue. These are all things you're going to see coming around as part of the Trump Doctrine, things that they're going to try to work on, affect how they'll rely on changing the world if it wants to change. I just pulled one of those ideas and kind of blew it up for you. Making the military strong again. That includes veterans and active military care and for their families. Having that capability, so having the best fighter plane in the world, but also having pilots who are trained enough to fly it. There are some pilots right now that only fly 1 or 2 hours a week because the fuel and the airframe cost that much to get up in the air, and they ran out of money. Over the last 8 years, our Congress has really cut the budgets. So just because you have a nice plane, if you don't have a pilot that can fly it, it's just nice to look at. So that's one of those ideas. Stop that sequester that the Congress has been doing, where they're just cutting 10, 20% off the top. State-of-the-art missile defense system. That kind of plays to the Russian angle of what Russia's been doing in the world. Cyber warfare being a priority. So if you're looking for a degree to go into to get a job in the government, cyber is not a bad place to look. Medical care, education support, and then getting veterans care at the VA and get rid of the issues at the VA. And the VA just made an announcement today on that. So they're moving forward quickly on the VA stuff. We'll see how the other pieces play out. Not that there's anything wrong with an idea, but you also need to look at what you're facing. So he's got these great ideas, what the Trump Doctrine is going to look like. And these are the issues he's going to try to match them up against. ISIS, A lot of violent radical Islamist groups all over the world. Africa is really struggling right now. Nigerian army is building quite a body count of civilians as they try to get rid of Boko Haram, an Islamist group down there. That is not going well, and that's not the end state you want in a war, is to kill your civilians. What's Syria going to look like? We saw the map of how Syria is divided right now. What's that going to look like in 4 years? That will be a really tricky one. Will President Assad still be there? What's the future of Iraq going to look like? Iraq's on a pretty good glide path right now, but how will Mosul break down now that the Kurds have been fighting so closely with us and they're identifying more as a Kurdish group than an Iraqi group? The Iranian nuclear issues and also their support for terrorism and Islamists around the world. Iran has still got its foot all the way down on the floor with the gas pedal, so how they deal with that will be a big tricky piece. The Palestinian-Israeli peace process. It really didn't do much under the Obama Doctrine. That wasn't one of the things they had high on their list because times just weren't right. This is something, though, that President Trump really wants to get after, and he's assigning a lot of people to work on it. So I still don't know if the time is right, but that's one of the things they want to chase after. Usually you wait to the end of your term to work on that, in case it comes to naught, because a lot of people watch it in the news, so they're trying to go after it right out of the gate, and we'll see how that works. What do you do with Russia in the Middle East? For the first time, Russia is sitting in the Middle East with a warm water port in Syria, troops on the ground. We didn't want them in there for many decades. They're there, they're operating, and Russians never leave. So I think you're going to deal with Russia in the Middle East for a long time. Russia and Ukraine. Again, Russians never leave, and they've been back and forth with Ukraine many times, and it's usually very bloody. It doesn't end well for either side. So that is one to watch. I think that one could blow up the worst because no one's watching it right now. Hardly anybody pays attention to Ukraine. I monitor 3 or 4 Ukrainian news channels every day to keep up on it. My good friends over there sitting in Kiev watching it unfold, so it's kind of interest to me. Russia and the European states and the Asian states. Russia and the European countries are really eyeballing each other right now, and the old Russian satellite states in Europe are quite worried because they saw what happened in Georgia, they saw what happened in Ukraine, and they don't want to rejoin Russia through some option like that. So that is also an issue on the plate. Not a lot of people are watching. The illegal immigration piece, they've made that a centerpiece of national security, so this idea of building a wall or building a better security system and having a better immigration system, they seem to be charging ahead on that. You got a really smart guy in General Kelly at Department of Homeland Security who worked the whole southern portion of North America and South and Central America. He watched all that for many years as a military commander, so he knows the area. It's not like a new guy walking in. We'll see how effective he is. And then the last piece, China and the Pacific. If you haven't noticed, you should watch and see what China is doing all throughout the Pacific region. That will be something we deal with. There are a lot of economic issues, but that's one we're going to be keeping an eye on for military reasons as well. Stuff that's going to happen in the future, maybe not in these 4 years, or things that they're not thinking about. Libya and ISIS. I mentioned what Libya looks like on the ground. How is ISIS going to exploit that? If there's no government, that's where terrorist organizations like to go, because it's easy to set up shop. Al-Qaeda taught us that. ISIS is even better at moving around and setting up shop. The radical Islamism spreading in Africa and the increase in terrorism there. Al-Shabaab really active in Mogadishu. We've got Boko Haram down there. You've got groups in many countries. And a lot of issues, even in the Sudan again, between Christian and Islamic areas inside of different countries. So that one, something to keep an eye on. I call it Russia's empiring move. It's not actually a word, I just made that one up. They continue to be on this quest to rebuild the old Russian area on the map, so that'll be another one to keep an eye on in the future. They're pretty good at it, though. China and Africa. China does a lot of economic work in Africa, but they're also starting to see a lot more Chinese military and intelligence assets on the ground in Africa, so that will be one to watch if they get involved in state building or state transformations or coups or putting in a more flexible president into a country. The Iranian and Arabian nuclear arms race. The United Arab Emirates is going to be the first country to have nuclear power on the Arab side of the Gulf. This is going to heat up quickly. If Iran does get a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will buy one, without a doubt. So they're for sale. that one's going to be one to watch. If that arms race heats up, you guys will be thinking about it for a long time. And what don't we see yet? I want you to think about that. I've talked about a lot of issues. You tell me at the end what else we need to be looking at. What other issues do you see from where you sit that are going to be important in the next 4 to 8 to 16 years? Because you'll probably be dealing with them as leaders. So great ideas. You have your doctrine. You know how you want to face it, what you're going to do to get there. You've looked at all the issues on the map. But do you have the right team to do it? Does he have the right cabinet secretaries? General Mattis, now SecDef Mattis, phenomenal. One of the smartest guys that we've ever had produced in the military. Really good guy. And people that I know that know him very well are very excited about what he's doing. The National Security Council staff, I'd say 70% really good. A couple in there I wouldn't have hired, but hey, I wasn't in charge of the hiring. But there's some really smart people in there. You know, if you've been a Green Beret and you've run SEAL Team 6, you could probably be a good guy to be in there and do some work on counterterrorism. So, alternate policy actors. So you have a National Security Council staff that's supposed to help you come up with these options. But there are other people in every White House. President Obama had Valerie Jarrett. She was really, really influential on policy. Not a national security expert, but she advised him and he listened. There are people just like that outside of President Trump's office as well. You'll see their names on television and newspapers. So there are other people. Are they the right ones to be near him? Are they giving good advice? Are they conflicting with the cabinet? Things you always look at to see if a White House is functioning well. I say there's a lot of work to do on that piece right now. But that's fine. That's the team he's built. What about the team he doesn't control, but he has to work with? Does he have the support of Congress to do what he wants to do? Right now he does, with the Republicans holding both houses. That could change. It usually does when the presidency changes. Does he have the media's support right now? I'll probably say not. You pick a fight with somebody, they usually aren't there to help you, but we'll see what happens with that. Does he have all the support of the voters? Based on some of the demonstrations you're seeing and the chance of not my president, bad place to be if you're in a democracy, because we only elect one president at a time, so he's the president. But does he have that support? We shall see. If he needs to do something big, and he goes to all his citizens, and you get anti-decision protests across the country, it's kind of hard to get something done. Social media, does he have their support? Pretty loud voice in the room now. Are Facebook and Twitter going to explode? And what do you got on? Instagram? What else? What else? What are you on? Snapchat? What else? Come on.
They don't want to reveal.
They're not going to monitor it. I'm just asking. You know, what are you guys using? You're not. Oh, okay. You're not on social media. I got it. I just didn't know what you're doing with your phones. Okay. And then, do we have the support of allies abroad? Do all the people we're going to need to help us with some of these big international problems really want to help us, or are they on their own track? So, something to think about. Really have all their support. All right. So that's what's going on in D.C. I need your feedback now. Questions, concerns, ideas. What are the issues and interests that we're going to have to deal with? What are we overlooking? If you want to talk about the Obama Doctrine, tell me what you thought was successful or not successful. I know you've been paying attention in class. And any thoughts and questions you have, we've got plenty of time to chat about it. So, right, pink time.
What are your thoughts on Trump's recent decision to increase military spending? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's a little extreme? Do you think it's unnecessary? What are your thoughts?
Okay, I'll repeat the questions too. So what are my thoughts on Trump increasing the budget for the Defense Department? As I mentioned earlier, the Defense Department's been under this sequestration where Congress cuts their budget every year, lump sum, just has been taking 10 or 20% off the top. So in the last 8 years, the budget has gone down about 100, and now he's talking about pushing it up about 50 or 80. We'll see what the real figures are when it comes out. So we're not quite coming back to where we were at the beginning of the Obama administration. So it's actually not a big increase. The one thing that people were worried about is he wants to make some cuts in the State Department, and that's actually more of an issue, especially us defense guys. We need our State Department partners. We need USAID. We need Peace Corps. We need those folks that are doing that job, so we don't have to do it. It's not really our job in the defense side of things. So I think that's probably the big issue that people are concerned about. He does have in mind, though, decreasing some of the positions at the State Department and get them back to diplomacy and get them away from some of the other issues they were working on. Because some of them they were doing poorly, and they probably need to be put somewhere else in the government. So I think it's important. You can't get readiness back unless you have more money. Because you can buy all the planes in the world, but if your pilots don't have time to fly them and you don't have gas to put in the planes, then you don't have an Air Force. It looks nice on paper, but it won't work in war. And that's where you get bloodied in war if you're not prepared. So what they really want to spend that money on is readiness, and that's getting people training again. I've been through that before under the Clinton administration. We literally ran out of gas on Fort Bragg, and we couldn't drive anywhere. We all had to walk everywhere all the time. So you don't get a lot of training done if you have to walk 15 miles to get to the range, because it takes 2 days to go shooting instead of driving a truck out in 15 minutes. So that's kind of what they're up against right now. We'll see. I think there's some merit in it. I think they need to really look at where the wasteful spending is in the Defense Department and cut that out as well. Don't just hand out money in bags. Hand out money to people who are smart at managing the money. So that is kind of the ethic going into it, to make things more business-like. We'll see if they can carry that out. That's a tough place to be business-like. Right beside.
What are your thoughts on Trump's Secretary of State pick, Rex Tillerson, being from like a corporate background as opposed to one from like a military one?
Okay. So is Tillerson a good pick based on his background? Secretary of States come from many different backgrounds. I think the best are people that are good leaders, because State Department doesn't really produce leaders like the military does. You hear about famous generals, you don't hear about famous ambassadors very often, because they don't really build a team as well, because they don't have the leadership training and background. They don't get groomed for it. So I think grabbing a business guy at this point, my friends in the State Department are telling me they want a good leader who knows how to run an organization. I think he's kind of a good pick on that side of it. He will help rebuild the State Department and raise the morale. He's really started to do that already with the decisions he's made. And I think his business side will help him because he has so many international contacts. He's not a new guy walking in, meeting a king for the first time, or meeting a president. He already knows that he can pick up the phone without the 13 trips across the ocean to build a relationship. He literally knows some of these presidents and can pick up the phone and say, hey, here's what needs to happen. Are you going to help us or not? He could be a little more blunt. So there could be some advantages. There's a big disadvantage. He just doesn't know how the State Department works. So he surrounds himself with the right people, and I think the person he's looking at for number 2 would be a good pick. He's a very seasoned ambassador if he gets picked. So I think all in all, he's a good choice. For where they're at right now, they kind of needed that. They've had diplomats, but they needed somebody to restructure the organization, cut some fat, and get them realigned on the core mission. So that's where I think they stand. We'll just keep going down the road here.
How much of a threat do you think Russia really is to America, especially in Ukraine and the Middle East? Like how likely do you think an outburst may essentially happen? And yeah, like you said, like the Ukraine, how there's like Ukraine, how I lost it. Just continue that.
So we'll start with the first half of that. So what do I think the real threat of Russia is to America? Is Russia going to come over and start dropping nuclear weapons, or pull up in a ship and offload troops on American shores? No, that's not going to happen. Superpowers generally don't do that to each other because they know what that results in if they both have nuclear weapons. But I think they are a big threat on the cyber front. The cyber criminals in Russia are phenomenal. They are really taking off right now when it comes to interfering in other countries' internal deliberations and elections and talks and journalism and many different things. And if they get into the financial sector with some of that, which they have some highly trained people, that could be devastating. If somebody were to come in and big cyber attack, shut down all the lights on the East Coast and turned off all the banking system, zero all your accounts tomorrow, we'd be Lord of the Flies in about 2 weeks in America. Because without power, without access to cash, everything's getting robbed, and everybody's robbing everybody. And it would get ugly quick. So those type of things, those are the ones that keep me awake at night. Those kind of really ruthless attacks, because you just can't turn the switch back on. There's no reset. Everybody can't run to the bank and say, no, I had 100,000 in my account, so put it back in there. That's nightmare scenario. But I think they're messing probably being the best word, empiring around the world, interfering with the Ukraine. If they continue to ratchet that up, that could get really bad for America. We may have to start doing more. We're not doing much in the Ukraine right now. If they take over some of the small European countries in either a cyber way like they did in Georgia, or if they mess with elections, or if they install their own leader, or if they just start undermining them, create coups and things like that. We're going to have to get involved if they're a member of NATO especially, or European Union. We're going to feel like that's part of our interest. So that's what I worry about. What do they do on the edges, and what do they do cyber-wise? They're really good at it. I'll pop up to the top there. Yes, sir.
What ways directly besides does cyber warfare, or can it possibly directly affect us? Besides that, I just don't know the extent of that.
Now, I'm not a cyber expert, but the infrastructure is a big thing. If you take down grids, if you take down electrical, that's one of the massive ones we've always worried about. If you shut down the safeguards in a nuclear facility, that's as good as dropping a nuclear bomb. If you mess with the banking industry, if you make Wall Street crash, you can also go in and make it unsafe to use the internet or take down parts of the internet. So things like that just completely disrupt our structure. Believe me, for people in their 50s right now, if you shut off Facebook, there'd be a lot of crying parents and grandparents. Like, it's really important right now. You probably all dumped Facebook or never even had it, but that would be a big deal. So it could be a lot of different ways, from really high-end nuclear issues to just nuisances that aggravate people. And it's too hard to block. The internet's a big place. It's kind of endless. So that's the painful part of it. Where can they hit? Anywhere. How do you guard it? You just need to be everywhere. Nobody can do that. So back there.
What are your thoughts on the recent travel ban that Trump's administration attempted to ban several countries in the Middle East from coming into America? Do you think that's an effective idea, or what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So the temporary halt of immigration from 7 countries. I think they missed some countries on the list. If I was writing that list, it would have been different. There are countries that are much worse than the ones that are on there, especially the ones who were behind 9/11. But the way they structured it had a lot of flaws in it, which the court picked up quickly, and especially green card holders. If somebody is already in the system and we let them come and go, there's a reason. We've already checked them out. I have a lot of good friends who are on green cards. That kind of disrupts your life. Those countries that were picked for a reason, though. I have good friends from many of those countries. There is no real process of vetting people to leave those countries, so anybody could get out of those countries, pop up somewhere else, come into our country. ISIS has already openly declared, they declared this years ago, that they're going to use the migration system, the refugee system, to move their fighters out of Syria and Iraq and into other countries. So we've known that's part of their plan. That's a public thing they've made, and they have moved them. We've caught them in Europe, and then they've done attacks in Europe. So the reasoning behind it, I get it, to try to tighten down where there is a gap. Clumsily executed, had some issues in the drafting. It's being redrafted. I think they'll come up with a tighter idea behind it. Is it really useful? Highly debatable. I'm kind of trying to prove something that hasn't happened yet. So you hope it's part of the solution, but it shouldn't be onerous to a point that you're hurting your own country. We want good immigrants. I was telling Marty at dinner, one of my best friends and my advisor in Islamic works and all those things that I do, he is an Islamic scholar. He's a PhD holder from Iraq, and he came here as a refugee with $20 in his pocket for standing up to Saddam Hussein. And so he lives in America now. He's taught at Stanford and Berkeley in a postgraduate school. He's now with SICE down in Washington, D.C. You know, that's a guy I do want to come into the country. So you can't just blanket and think that every refugee or immigrant from a country that's got some bad people in it is the solution to weeding everybody. Just a clumsy thing. I think there are better ways to go about it, but there's some reasoning behind it. There's things that I won't talk about in here why we do some of those things. They look really clumsy and stupid from the outside, but sometimes there's some really important ideas behind what's going on that the American public just doesn't even know about yet. But that's why we have a court system to make sure that stupid things don't get through. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the recent assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother and the ballistic missile testings, how much of a threat do you think North Korea is?
North Korea, I think that the biggest threat of North Korea is the unpredictability, and they're playing that up. It's also, you can see it on the counter side, and we've heard it from people. People look at President Trump as being unpredictable because he does things differently. He speaks differently. talks like a New Yorker down on a construction site sometimes. You know, he makes decisions that didn't seem like the obvious choice, and he doesn't explain, and he does it quickly. So that can be good. In foreign policy, like actually a lot of my State Department friends said, hey, there's the idea of the madman president. It's actually quite useful in diplomacy. You say, hey, you better help us because I don't know what he's going to do. People use that. So that's the biggest concern most people have with North Korea. We don't know what he's going to do, and he uses that to make his diplomacy work. Like, hey, I might have another nuke. I may launch it. Keep an eye on their missile program. That's how you can really test. Until they get a missile that can get across the Pacific, they're not a real threat to us, other than maybe cyber, and they're not that good at it. But unless they get a missile that can move a nuclear weapon, then we don't have to worry about it. We do have to worry about our allies, though. They're a lot closer to Japan. They're a lot closer to Taiwan. They're closer to Hong Kong and a lot of other places. So that's the piece of the puzzle. Watch their missile program. In the back center.
Are there any national security issues or things that you believe we should be addressing right now that you don't believe Trump is addressing correctly?
Addressing correctly or
Like
correctly?
on his doctrine that we should be addressing?
I thought about it a lot while we were working on national security strategy outline. I think those are the big ones. I don't know, and I really want your feedback. I'd love to hear from you for what your generation sees and how you look at the world, what you think is missing would be a useful thing for me to help understand what we might not know. There's a certain age of people that work in any presidential administration, which means you're usually missing a generation's worth of information. Even though I reach out to you and other people, I don't always get the big picture. So while you're sitting there, think about those type of things. I'd love to, do you have any suggestions or anything you can think of?
I think you're correct on the cyber front.
Okay, cyber is the biggest issue. Awesome. Yes?
Can I just ask about Saudi in the absence of Iranian nuclear weapon? Just can the Middle East be fixed with Saudi stuck in the middle of it, financing terrorism and billions of dollars?
Saudi's role. Can the Middle East be fixed with what some of the things Saudi Arabia does? I think so. One of the interesting things I saw last fall, it may have been, I don't know if it was before or after I came here to speak, Saudi Arabia admitted in public that they've been doing some really bad stuff when it comes to talking about Islam. That they have been speaking about it wrong, and that they needed to moderate their tone and discourse when it comes to religion. And they are actually starting to move ahead with those ideas to look for radical clerics, look for radical internet sensations, people who are out there twisting Islam or making violence seem cool and a fun thing to do. So they're starting to make that shift. I think now is the perfect time for America to kind of put the elbow on them and say, yeah, keep moving on this, and we're going to watch your finances more closely. They already think we're, because of the Iranian nuclear deal that multiple countries took part in, which we were a leading member, they think America is trying to get close to Iran and dump off the Arab allies we've had for so long. So kind of the perfect time, while they think you're allying with their enemy, who they think is their enemy, to kind of push them to move in that direction. As long as the nuclear arms race doesn't heat up more, I think you can make some movement on that. How we talk about dealing with that kind of radical operations going on, funding terrorism, letting people talk about violence and associating with Islam, I think that's going to be a big part of it. If we can do it right, we can do it nuanced, we can make those communications. I think Egypt's already gotten the message, and Jordan as well, because they're dealing with some big issues with that in their country. So those leaders are already starting to say, okay, I get what you want, and we agree. We agree with America. You may not talk about it the same way we do, but we get what you mean. If that happens with Saudi Arabia, UAE's kind of starting to get on board. You can see some big shifts, and we can make some movement there. We do it unclumsy. If we're too clumsy, and we do it poorly, and Iran starts to ramp up the nuclear, it'll all go somewhere in a handbasket. Yes, right here.
Do you think Trump will work with the EU differently after Brexit and
The EU one is an interesting one to me. I don't know how much they're interested in working with the EU and what the president does in relation to that. Her mention was after this Brexit thing happens and this possible Frexit, if the French also leave the EU, will we deal with them differently? I'm not sure that this administration is convinced that the EU has been the best thing for Europe, just like Britain's kind of come to that conclusion and France is thinking about it now because of the cost of what they're going to have. So we'll see. I think you'll see more. You'll be able to figure that out more by how they react to Britons after they're gone from the EU, and if France does pick up and start to move out, how they deal with France, whether they help them, assist them. I just don't get the feeling that the EU is as important as the individual relationships with the countries. Yes, sorry.
You mentioned the need for allies, and speaking of Europe, I mean, they've got multiple problems themselves. Are they even in a position to think outside of holding things down at home to help us on some of these big issues? I mean, they're on fire.
Yeah, Europe has got a lot of internal problems going on. The largest migration since World War II is occurring in their countries, and they have no idea who's in their countries right now because they kind of just stormed over the borders. So they're knee-deep in trying to figure out who's who and cut down on issues that come from that kind of mass migration. They are already starting to reach out. One of the things that we wanted to do was get them to help pay for NATO. The idea when you join NATO is this alliance that we'd all protect each other in case of war, was that you would use 2% of your GDP to fund your military. So your military is capable of helping out somebody in case of war. And some countries are already starting to take the threat or the request, however you want to phrase it, and they're starting to spend that money again and obligate that money back towards their military and pull it out of other programs. So we've been kind of paying the bill for NATO for a long time. So we'll see what they have left in the tank. If they do build up their militaries, are they willing to use them? Or I think you'll see a lot of alliance with us though on the intelligence front. Europe understands the weight that's on their shoulders right now with all those migrants in their country that they just don't know who they are. So the intelligence cooperation is going to get really, really tight again. If it's had any distance in the past, that's going to tighten up because that's a lot of people to sort through, and it just takes a lot of friends and intelligence to sort through millions of people to make sure there's not the next Nice truck driver in the midst. Yes?
What do you think about Michael Flynn and Russia's DNC hacking and the Trump's potential connection to Russia?
The one country that I don't deal with a lot is Russia. I had no oversight while I was there of any relations to talks that were going on with Russia. So I think it's going to take an investigation. I don't know if the Senate will do it, if they'll appoint somebody to figure out what was going on there. What I do know, what has been released so far, what the FBI has said, is that what General Flynn did talking to the Russians is the same thing every administration does. Once you think you're going to win, you start talking to all the foreign leaders from other countries. The day that story broke, President Obama's first ambassador to Russia came out and said, I was in Moscow talking to Russian government officials before Obama won the election, is what you do. So we'll see how that shakes out. If there were any other links to the campaign from Russia, that's going to be a huge issue. And this could nullify the whole Trump Doctrine, and you're going to see them do nothing but deal with Congress and investigations and who talked to Russia and when they talked to Russia. That will deflate everything. It will be a really interesting time for you guys to watch government do nothing, because it will be ugly if that finds anything. Yeah. Everybody, you guys.
I was wondering, how do you think the Trump administration is going to, if at all, continue the war on drugs, and if they're going to view that as like a bigger issue, or not like a bigger issue, but more on the level of like combating ISIS or something more important?
I don't know if it's going to rise to the level of ISIS. I think they did already sign some executive orders on marijuana in the U.S., so there's kind of some leaning there towards ramping up the importance of dealing with drugs in America, but I'm not sure it's going to rise to that level of a national security issue. But because of its impact on the southern border in America, where gangs and beheadings are occurring to move all these products over the border because America can't stop doing drugs, I think it will rise in national security on that front. It's related to the southern border, so you'll see it in that arena especially. Yeah.
I don't think you mentioned what the next 4 years will look like in terms of the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something they put a lot of weight on. I believe his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has ties to the current Israeli Prime Minister, has actually been tasked to work on that project. So I think you're going to see a big push at the beginning. I don't know how successful it will be, but it'll be something they concentrate on. I'm not sure the timing is right. Israel doesn't seem too anxious to get back in any talks, and on the Palestinian side, they can't seem to coordinate the two halves of their political system to come up with one voice or even just two voices to go to the table. And you can't have negotiations if you can't get everybody to the table. So we'll see what the timing is really like. If they put a lot of effort on it, and the Israelis step out and say, we're ready to talk, that puts a lot of pressure on the Palestinian side to get somebody to go talk. Otherwise, they look like the ones who are at fault. And in international diplomacy, you don't want to be the one at fault. That's kind of the game they play. Well, we were ready and you weren't, so everybody gets ready if you put enough pressure on it. But we'll see where that goes. Does that help answer? Yeah.
You talked kind of a little bit about Trump's relationship with the media and how they've been a little bit at each other.
Yeah.
How can Trump, do you think Trump having a better relationship with the media going forward can help him in trying to accomplish his foreign policy goals? Like, how do you think the media can help him? Is it worth him trying to rekindle that relationship?
I think it is. You never, journalism in America is one of the best journalism systems in the world. And you can generally get news. Unfortunately, we have so many voices now, and some voices are so biased. Even if they don't know they're biased, they're really deeply biased, and they're real thin-skinned about it. If you tell them, I have dealt with reporters a lot. If you tell them they're biased, they'll really try to reject the label. It's okay to be biased. Everybody is, but just know that you have it. But they're still the best in the world. So I think from that standpoint, if you're going to get any good press, and you need good press to get things done, you do need to make friends with people, or at least call some kind of truce. So I think there'll be some different handlings. This may just be a shot over the bow to get people to start talking about recognizing your biases, at least admitting you have them, and try to be even-handed. You don't have to like the president, but at least just don't make every story negative or don't make every story positive. Just tell us the facts. We're smart enough to figure it out. I think that's the conversation that's going on in a lot of newsrooms right now. I hope that's the result we get out of it. But 4 years of him going to war with CNN is probably not going to help many people. And it's probably not going to get much done. Because you do need them to honestly report. And if you're fighting with it, it's just not going to happen. But go recycling.
Going off the media, where do you agree to keep up with current events?
All right. That is a question I get a lot. And it's actually a kind of a long answer. So first thing I do in the morning is I check Twitter. I follow about 400 different newsmakers and news organizations on Twitter. I go through those articles, just skim through them if they're important. I tag them for later. I teach classes, so sometimes I'll grab the article and hang it on the website for the course I teach for my students, and I'll read it throughout the day. Then I go to CNN.com. This is before I wake my wife up when we got breakfast. I check out CNN.com's front page, make sure I know the big stories they're covering. Then I go to FoxNews.com, get the other side of the story, read theirs through quickly. Sometimes I even read the Christian Science Monitor in the morning, get the front lines from that. They're usually pretty good, unbiased organization. Then I go to Google News. I flip through the world events, the U.S. events, and usually a little bit of the science and health if I'm interested in it that day. I don't focus anything on local news. That's not my world. I don't care what the local high school team did. Then I get up, cook breakfast, watch Emmett Morning Joe on MSNBC that I've taped so I can fast forward through it. Get the first hour because it repeats in the second hour. So I get the first hour of that. I go back to Fox News throughout the day, check out their morning program. It's usually not the use of the news front. Throughout the day I have CNN on my TV in my den where I'm working. And then I'm on Twitter probably 2 or 3 times a day checking big stories, retweeting stuff with other newsmakers. And then when I'm in the car, I listen to talk radio on the conservative side, and I listen to talk radio on the liberal side, which is getting harder to find. It's easier in California. Then I listen to NPR when I'm driving. Whenever I drive, I got one of those on. I just keep going back and forth between different voices. And then I try to make it a point every day to read something from a news organization I don't usually read about. So if somebody puts an article on Twitter that looks interesting and somebody I don't usually read, I read that one so I can get their perspective and see if there's something I'm missing somewhere else. So, and then I read about 10 books at a time. I flip back and forth between different books, and I read 3 or 4 different foreign affairs journals, different articles, and then yeah, that's usually it. in a day, something like that.
Jason, I noticed you didn't mention the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or Washington Post, arguably the three most prestigious papers in the country and some maybe in the world. Why is that?
On Twitter, I usually get New York Times, WAPO, and Wall Street Journal. And I know people work on all those stacks, so I'll see some of those in emails. People will send me things or ask me questions about it. So I see all those in the day. When I look on Google News, and I'm looking at all the articles that pop up, I'm not reading the local papers. It's usually one of the big national papers. LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post. Don't read much out of Chicago. They do a lot of local, but sometimes there's some good articles. So I'm all over the place when it comes to newspapers. I try to read a little bit of everything. My recommendation to everybody I mentor is do not read one news source. If you only read the Huffington Post or you only read Fox News, you might as well not read anything because you are becoming a zombie. You've got to read multiple sources. There are too many voices. If you only read liberal biased organizations or conservative biased, then that's all you got. And in an argument or a debate, or when you try to make policy, you're a pretty one-sided animal and you're pretty useless. So don't do that. Get your mind open. It'll make you better at what you want to do. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah.
What do you think of Trump refusing those daily security campaigns, and because it's often repetitious, do you think this makes him less of a civil servant and more of just acting as himself?
He is not refusing the daily security brief. He gets it every day. That still gets delivered. Some of the things that happen in the transition, because you only have 60 days to get in the office, he didn't take it every day. Not every president does. I've read presidential daily briefs. Sometimes they are repetitious. It's one of the things they're trying to change about the intelligence community, is to give the president information he needs about upcoming decisions and not just throw the phone book at him and say, somewhere in there are some important stories. Because no one's good. The president's time is the most valuable thing he has. So if you don't give him precise information, exactly what he needs to make decisions that week, you're not helping him. You're hurting him by handing him stuff. So that is one of the things they're trying to change. I think it needs to change. It's what I changed when I worked in the intelligence community. I would not let my people just throw anything at the people we were writing for. I made them write things that would help them make decisions, because that's your job. You still need to tell them about stuff they don't know, but it can't bog down them from making decisions, because that's what they get paid for. The president makes decisions. He needs to know those things. And if you go back in time and look at this presidential daily brief, this is kind of a new thing in the era of presidencies. If you go back to Eisenhower's presidency, he never read it. A general, 5-star general who was president, didn't read the daily presidential brief. The CIA brought over the brief the night before. His national security advisor, another general named Goodpaster, read it, consumed it, because he knew Eisenhower from World War II, pulled out what was important, went in the morning, and verbally gave Eisenhower the brief. What he knew he wanted to know, and how he knew he wanted to hear it. So there are different ways to deliver this. Just walking in and saying, read this big book, and I'll answer the questions you have, is not always the best way. And you have to make that presidential daily brief what that president needs. So they're all different. President Obama loved to read, and he liked to grab his iPad and sit and read through all of it. I don't think President Bush did it the same way. So sometimes they have different people do it. And that's kind of the important part of intelligence. You have to feed the decision maker what he needs to make decisions in a timely manner, otherwise you're irrelevant. And if you bog him down with too much interesting information that's not timely or doesn't help him make a decision, you actually hurt him every day. You're making him wonder, do they not know what's going on in the world? Just keep telling me about this bingo game in Ukraine. I don't care about bingo. I'm not working on bingo right now. So that's kind of where that sits. You'll see that change back and forth. This guy, he's a consumer of news. He stays up. He's a businessman. He worked international business, so he's awake more than you and I are. He hardly ever sleeps. And he consumes news throughout the day. So a lot of times what's in an intel brief, he's already read about. He may not know the deep, dirty details, but presidents don't always need those deep, dark details. They just need to know what's going on, what's going to impact their day or their week. So see some changes coming up in that. I think you'll see some big changes in how they're going to do that. Because every president has to make it suit himself. It's written for that specific president. It's not written for all presidents. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Do you think Trump's temperament is something we should be concerned about, like with his foreign policy or domestic policy?
The status of Trump's temperament. I think every president has a different temperament, everybody does it in a different way. There are many who had issues with previous presidents' temperaments. If you were alive to hear Truman talk to people, you'd probably be thinking we're doing okay. Every president acts differently. We just don't have audio of how some of them had tweeted in the past because there was no Twitter. So I think it'll be interesting to watch. He's different. They're all different. Every president's different. And you can really only judge it looking back. You can't really judge it going forward. It could work out in his favor. On some things it's going to probably hurt him. On others it's not. I predicted Trump was going to win the election last summer. In the summer I knew he was going to win because I had been traveling the country talking to audiences, very diverse audiences. And I knew he was going to win because America was ready to change. And people actually like the way he talks. People were tired of the nuance and the long speeches, and they wanted, what are you talking about? So we'll see. It could hurt him badly, or more people may start to not worry about the temperament and just worry about the substance. It's really, it's something you have to judge looking back. So you tell me 4 years from now. We'll see what happens. Any other thoughts, comments, ideas? In the back.
What are your opinions on China's man-made islands?
Yeah, that's it. This question's about the man-made islands that China's putting throughout the Pacific. I think that's a pretty dangerous thing to start doing. And if America went over and built some man-made islands next door to Russia, we'd probably all have problems. So I think it's a really provocative thing to do, especially in disputed waters. That's going to cause issues. And if you do that, you know it's going to cause issues. It's not like you haven't thought through the ramifications of what's going to happen on a project like that. So pretty provocative, could cause some minor explosions, and we'll have to deal with them. Anything else? Thoughts, questions? What national security issues are we looking at? We know cyber was important. What else? What else is the government not looking at? What are you worried about in your lifetime?
Well, I mean, this is sort of on the front of Russia again, but their sort of interaction with Turkey over the past year or so, particularly with the military coup and then the assassination of, I believe, the Russian ambassador by a Turkish man on Turkish soil.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering maybe your thoughts on how that's developing.
I think Russia and Turkey have got a very adult relationship going on. Because I was really surprised when that Russian ambassador got assassinated live. It was a blip. So I think they've really got some agreement going on. Russia's sitting in Syria now. They're helping the Assad regime. You've got Turkey, who's the NATO member, working on northern Syria, fighting against the same enemy sometimes, but also trying to figure out what happens after ISIS is out of Syria. So they've got something figured out. They're leading a lot of talks together and discussions together, and I think they're kind of stepping into the void that was in the Middle East for leadership. So we'll see if that continues. There could be some turning point that causes that to break down, but right now, that's a pretty interesting relationship. Nobody would have probably guessed that's how it was going to turn out.
It's after 8 now, and thank you for all your